Welcome to Voices for Freedom, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation series dedicated to highlighting the tragic and powerful stories of victims of communist countries, past and present, and to helping raise voices for freedom around the world. I'm Ashley Davis, Director of Public Affairs, and I'm pleased to present to you today Nguyen Ngọc Như Quỳnh, more commonly known by her pen name, Mother Mushroom, who is a Vietnamese blogger and dissident. Mother Mushroom first used her pen name in her popular blog Mae Nam. Mother Mushroom, who was the leader of the network of Vietnamese bloggers, an independent writers union, gained prominence in 2016 for criticizing the Vietnamese government's mismanagement of the Formosa steel plant toxic spill in Ha Tinh province on her blog. She had previously criticized the government, but was spotlighted when the Formosa controversy attracted weeks of protests and public outrage. It is suspected that widening news coverage of the spill caused the Communist Party of Vietnam to make an example of one of its most prominent critics and send a message that it would not tolerate open condemnation. Mother Mushroom was arrested on October 10, 2016, while trying to visit an imprisoned political activist in the central coastal town of Nha Trang. Mother Mushroom, who writes on her own blog and on platforms run by Vietnamese abroad, including Dan Lam Bao, was taken to Son Ngo prison and charged under Article 88 of the Penal Code, a provision that carries maximum penalties of 20 years in prison for the vague crime of propagandizing against the state. Mother Mushroom staged a hunger strike beginning on October 12, 2016, in response to her lack of legal representation in the investigation phase of the charges lodged against her. On March 29, 2017, the U.S. State Department recognized Mother Mushroom in absentia with its International Women of Courage Award, which was presented by U.S. First Lady Melania Trump. On October 17, 2018, Mother Mushroom was released early after serving 2 years and 1 week in prison. She was escorted by Vietnamese security police from prison directly to Noi Bao Airport in Hanoi, where she was turned over to U.S. Embassy officials. She was reunited with her 2 children, an elderly mother, and they now live in Houston, Texas, in exile. Mother Mushroom was awarded the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation's Human Rights Award in 2019 for her bravery and her advocacy for human rights in Vietnam. During today's event, Never Keeping Silent, Mother Mushroom will give us an overview of her story that will help us to recognize the lengths dissidents like her will go to advocate for freedom. We are privileged to have Mother Mushroom here with us today to share her story. Following her presentation, we will have a discussion with Mother Mushroom, drawing upon questions submitted by the audience. You can submit questions for her throughout the event using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, Mother Mushroom, I welcome you and invite you to share your story.
Yeah. Hi, Ashley, and hi to everyone. And ladies and gentlemen, today we meet in a very special forum because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I don't believe this circumstance can make us forget about the struggle of the people, the victims in the state of oppression, and those imprisoned by the communist regimes. If this day the America speak up for an angry and anguished appeal I can't breathe, and then in the communist dictators, including Vietnam, our people would be in the situation we can't breathe for nearly half a century. I attended with you at 2019 conference as a surviving witness, an activist who fight for human rights, environment issues, and democracies, a single mother of 2 small kids who was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison by the communist government for merely exercising the right to express my views. Last year, while I was able to speak freely in the United States, dozens of other political prisons in Vietnam, in northern detention centers like Nghệ An, Thanh Hóa, and Hà Tĩnh, were going on hunger strike to protect against the abuse of prisoners. And this year, that situation continues when detainee Huỳnh Đức Thanh Bình, another patriotic student, was beaten along with others at Xuân Lộc Detention Center, Đồng Nai. Since the end of 2019, there was more people arrested for exercising their right to free expression. They are freelance journalist Phạm Chí Dũng, YouTuber Nguyễn Văn Nghiêm, activist Trần Đức Thạch, journalist Phạm Văn Thành, blogger Nguyễn Tường Thụy. According to an official report, there are more than 239 political prisoners when they have been unlawfully detained in Vietnam since January 2020. And there are still plenty of cases of detainment without trial. Any Vietnamese activist would endure and face the hardship of being harassed, beaten, imprisoned, and brought to a closed trial, where their family and the public of the detainees are not allowed to attend. So I think that my work as an activist, even in exile, is not yet done. And recounting all the hardship and love suffered by the victims of the communists would require us to publish an endless volume of books. I myself am lucky enough to have support from the international community that I am able to share my own story with you. But other mothers, such as like Miss Đoàn Thị Hồng, who took the street to protest against the Vietnam Special Economic Zone lease project. She was forcibly separated from her 3-year-old daughter and imprisoned without trial until now. Life in prison is a countless chain of difficult days, suffering from physical and mental abuse, being separated from the outside world, facing difficulties again every family visit. There are some of the predicament that political prisoners in Vietnam have to endure every day. So I do hope you all continue to pay your attention, speak up and fight for them. Please turn your thoughts and compassion into action to support us. Please consider that a voice, an article, a joint petition, or an action alert from you is an encouragement to improve human rights in Vietnam. I would like to thank you, the Victim of Communist Memorial Foundation, for having the seminars every year so that we can continue to stand up for the victim instead of oppression and those imprisoned by the communist regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that there are many human rights violations happening around the world as every day goes by, and Vietnam is a country in your focus. I would ask you to focus on your voice of concern that created a platform to protect Vietnamese detainees who are in need the most, and would send a strong message to the communist authorities that they must be cautious by your reports and your demands. In addition, I would like to emphasize that your efforts to fight for freedom for those who have been imprisoned also has a positive effect on those who are active and not yet arrested. It has given them the necessary assurance that the world is always watching and being concerned for them, and that they will not be abandoned if they are imprisoned. I hope that you continue to pay attention, speak up and fight for political prisoners in Vietnam and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mother Mushroom, for sharing your story and for your relentless courage in the fight against communism. Before we turn to some of the questions attendees have already sent in, I want to remind those in attendance that you can submit questions for Mother Mushroom using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now I'll turn to some of the questions that have already been submitted. So Mother Mushroom, I'd love to hear from you about what your experience was like living in Vietnam. So, before you started your advocacy and then when you started blogging, what was a normal day like living in Vietnam?
A normal life of mine or the others?
You can tell us from your experience, what was a normal day like for you?
Normally, because before the internet appeared, I am like the other people, just working in the morning, wake up in the morning, go in exercise, and think how to go out for the job, come in bed with a normal life like the other people. But when we have internet, everything has changed, especially when we share about the normal days or the normal life and the normal situation, and we have to dig on the internet to find the truth that what we learn in the school, it is very different from the real life. And we realize that we have to listen all the liar from the communist government every day. So I try to express my true thought, my mind with my friend. And at the beginning, it just have some people. It's not many people to use Facebook or blog like today. So you know that they try to silence all the people who is like at the beginning how to use internet to express the true feeling with the government.
Yes, that makes sense. And thank you so much for sharing. I think a lot of our attendees today are just so curious to hear your story and hear what your experiences are like compared to those here in the United States. So I'd love to hear from you. I know you mentioned, things were a bit different before internet was as widely available and then different afterwards. So once, you had more access to internet, what inspired you to start blogging in the early 2000s?
I think that I would have more responsibility with my life when I was being a mom. It means that when I start my blog, I just look like a normal mother, just how to make a record from the beginning, the first month, the second month, the third month. But one day when I go to the hospital and I see a lot of poor people have to wait in the hot weather, and I just try to raise my question, how we have to pay for the medical system and the people got the poor condition like that. And some of my friends said that, oh, you have a good job, you work like a travel agency, you have a condition to go around the country, so don't pay attention to what happened, just know yourself. And someday and every day I think that how I have to let my children grow up like that, just silent. So I talked to my mother that I have to pay more attention to another people around me. So I pay attention to environment, the relationship between the Vietnam and China government, and I try to express my feeling, my writing on blog, and you know what happened after that.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing. So I know that you talked a little bit about how your friends were skeptical about, these thoughts that you were having and, your ideas that you would share these on your blog and speak out against the government. I'm curious to learn a little bit more, where did you find that courage to speak the truth? I know you said that you did it for your children. You didn't want them to grow up in a world where, all of these injustices were happening and nothing was being done about it. But Did you know the kinds of consequences you were going to suffer when you first started speaking out against the Communist Party of Vietnam? And how aware were you of these possible dangers?
At the beginning, I don't know that I would be in danger. I would be in dangerous if I express my true feeling. I didn't know that. I think that I have the right freedom of expression like the other people all over the world. So at the beginning, I didn't know that. In 2009, I was arrested the first time. It was 10 days in prison. So I was so scared about that. And I think that I closed my blog. I weak. I stopped raising my voice because it's so dangerous. But after that, I realized that who will speak if you don't? And if we have to train to create a new future for our children, so I continue to raise the voice again. And in the second time when I back to the internet, I try to read more about the human rights, about the freedom of expression, and about the other NGO to protect the human rights all over the world. Try to find the protection outside.
Thank you. It's incredible to hear about your courage, after so much oppression that you've undergone, and multiple attempts of the government to try to silence you. You continue to speak out. So I'd love to hear from you. You said that first time when you were arrested, you were scared and you closed your blog for a little bit, but then you decided that you needed to keep speaking out. So did you ever feel discouraged by the intense oppression you faced by the government, and what did you do in response to this?
The first time when I closed my blog, I was scared. I was really scared about my life. And I have to think at that moment that, blog is very dangerous, like our government said that. And but when I find out that I keep silent, like they told me, but they still put more pressure on me. I beg to work, they don't give me my passport to go abroad. They don't give me the right to travel for my job. So I think that if we silent, they will more stronger. And the only weapon we have is the internet. So I think that I have to come back, because if I keep silent like the other people, like my parents, like my grandmother, like my grandparents, it look like nothing changed. And when I entered to the internet in 2009, or before 2 or 3 years, 2006, the first time when I raised the name Mother Mushroom on the internet, no one care about human rights in Vietnam. That's the problem. So I realized after my case that the Vietnamese people under the communist government, we don't have the human rights like our government always propaganda.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. So I know that you mentioned that in the beginning you did have some family and friends who, were worried about you advocating, but how did they respond when you continued your advocacy and, you made your blog live again and continued that work? And did you have friends and family who continued to try to get you to stop advocating, or after that, were they just fully supportive of the work you were doing?
Normally at the beginning, my mom is like the other mother. She said that, okay, so you should have a normal life like the other. But every day we see a lot of situation around the neighborhood, the people around us. And so my mom is the first one who support me to live the way I want. So I appreciate her. Without my mom, I don't have the day today.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I know that it was very difficult for your children and your mother when you were in prison and, had, you were there for several years and were being persecuted then. Can you speak a little bit to how your experiences have impacted your family and, the support you've received from them and response you've received from them over the years during all of the different circumstances that you've undergone?
You know that the reason I got when I speak up with the government, the one who was suffer is not me. It's what my kids and my daughter. She's the one who suffer the most. In 2016, when the day I was arrested, she was the one who saw everything. And you know that she suddenly changed like another kid. She keeps silent, looking around with the other people with tough eyes. She looking and she watching with the other people, and she don't want to express her feelings. And sometimes when we work like together like this, some of you will never know the reason that we fight for the human rights is will affect it on the new generation like my daughter. How much? Because when she came to the US last year, and I bring her to go to Washington DC with me in some journey for advocacy for human rights, and she just raised a question like how the same duty, the same activities like in Vietnam, but in the US, the people raise the voice, the people encourage her mom. But in Vietnam, her mom like an enemy of the government. And she raised the question with her friend in Vietnam. And she said that now she knows exactly human rights is different from the Vietnam and the US. And it really impacts on the future of the children. But sometimes some of you and like the other people work for human rights, for raise the voice for people, especially the people live in the communist country, would never know the reason that you bring. It's for a future. It's not for me. For my future is my kids.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to touch a little bit more about the differences in freedom of speech between the United States and Vietnam and what you've experienced. I know you've just touched a little bit about your daughter's experiences coming here to the US and that comparison that she saw, but will you share a little bit more about your view of the United States and how your life here in the United States compares to your life in Vietnam, and in the world of citizen journalism and the importance of freedom of speech, how do Vietnam and the United States compare? If you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, that's the question. Thank you for the question. But that's the question all people ask me to compare between Vietnam and US. I still remember the same question. And when I came to DC last year, and people said that now the freedom of the journalist is not like before. And how I think about that? I still think that the US is a rim like before. And I said, yes, of course. Because look like a journalist in the US, they have the right to talk about the president every day without arrest, without trial. And in the US, I have take more time to look back in Vietnam. So my job is every day is I also made a YouTube channel to find out the truth and to express my view on the news every day in Vietnam, because in Vietnam is different from the US. Is we don't have independent journalists. We don't have the independent newspaper. All the newspaper in Vietnam belong to the government. So it's very different. And you know, freedom is always like a necessary demand. And in every country, we fight for it every day. But it's very different from Vietnam and US.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's, really enlightening for our viewers here today to hear your firsthand experience of those two different, countries and what you've gone through. So when you first arrived in the US in 2018 after your early release from prison, you told a large crowd of supporters that you will, quote, never keep silent in your fight for democracy in Vietnam. So after all that you've been through and all of the physical, mental, and emotional torture you underwent in prison in Vietnam, some may think that you would want to just forget about these terrible things that have happened to you and not want to continue retelling those experiences and resharing that. But what inspires you to continue retelling your story and continue your advocacy while you're living here in the United States?
I think that yesterday I told you already, sometimes we don't know the reason what we did in the yesterday, but we know that if we do something, if we try something to change, it's change. So last month I have a friend. She was in prison with me in Thanh Hóa, in the north of Vietnam, and she came back and she talked to me that you made the life in prison different because after you was released, and I don't know that what you say outside, what you speak out to the world, but the condition of the prison, the human prisoner life is what changed. Last year I told you that the poor thing, the condition of the human prisoner is very bad. We have no space, private space for women. But this year it was changed in prison. Both you and me don't have a chance to see that change, but the other people know what happened because when she back from the prison, she read the newspaper and she know what I speak out, and it's what affected for. Normally it's like just a small effect, but I find I was inspired from that story because I think that just in case we keep silent, nothing change. But if we never keep silent, something will change every day.
That's incredible. And I know we talked about this a little bit before, like you mentioned, and I think it's really inspiring to see, the huge impact that you're having still in Vietnam, even while living here in the US, simply by speaking out and making known the conditions of political prisoners in Vietnam. I remember last year when we awarded you our VOC Human Rights Award, you talked a lot about those inhumane conditions of political prisoners, especially during the summer months. So it was about a year ago now that we had that ceremony, and you said that during those summer months, the prison guards would remove the fans from cells, and it would be, about 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat and really unbearable conditions. I can't even imagine that, having to undergo that. And so I think it's incredible. Like you said, when you spoke out about that a year ago, you can now see from your friend who has reported that those conditions have improved thanks to the work that you're doing here in the US and the advocacy you're doing here. So can you share a little bit more, if you have those details from your friend, about how those conditions have improved specifically for prisoners in Vietnam thanks to the work you're doing to speak publicly?
Like I talked before, the woman prisoner in Vietnam, they have to go out to take a wash in the air. It means that we don't have a bathroom. It looks like just they have a lake, like we take water outside, and no special place for the woman to do some privacy thing like a bathroom. Normally, like we don't have a bathroom in the prison. But when we talk about that last year, and they met, it was different. They feel like a bathroom for the people, and it was really effective to the people when they read the article about that from me, because they said that they try to ask for the bathroom 1 year or 2 years, even in 10 years already, but no one care about that. But when the international human rights NGOs outside or some organized pay attention on Vietnam raise the question and demands on how the people in Vietnam live in the condition, the condition living, the living condition of the human prisoner. They, when you question about that, you ask about that, they have to change. It looked like 2 or 5 years or 7 years ago, they can arrest me easily, but 4 or 5 years later, they just try to silence who is the most affected on the internet. It's not look like before, easily to arrest a person, but they have to pay on the international community outside more than before.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing a bit more about that. So you've been writing about human rights and environmental issues such as industrial pollution since you first started blogging, and gained prominence for criticizing the Vietnamese government's mismanagement of the Formosa steel plant toxic spill in 2016. So will you share a bit more about that time in which you found out the spill and decided to write about it? And did you know then that it was going to be such a large point of interest for so many Vietnamese, and possibly the reason that the communist government would decide to imprison you again?
I think that the most dangerous thing I thought is it was Formosa. It was toxic pollution in 2016 in Formosa, Hà Tĩnh, because it's really affected on the relationship between Vietnam and China. And I still remember an investigator who always worked with me during my arrest. They talked to me that they arrest me. It's not because I raise my voice for myself, but I try to encourage the other people step out of their fear to raise the voice. And the communist government, they don't want that. You know that 1 people speak up, they don't care. 10 people speak up, they don't care also. But 100, 1,000, 10,000, and they said that they don't want the people who try to make the other feel less fear of the government. So that's the reason they try to arrest me again.
Thank you for sharing. So have you seen that since that time when you were encouraging so many people to speak out, have you seen the amount of advocacy in Vietnam increase? And are those activists still speaking out about what's going on in Vietnam today?
Yes, I feel happy that after me, a lot of activists, they're younger, they are smarter, and they pay more attention than me before. But the most concern is after my sentence, they sentenced me. They sentenced me up to 10 years. Before it's not for the same case. Before it was 3 years or 5 years. But after my case, it was up to 8, 9, 10, 15, 20 years. But younger people, the younger activists, they still to raise the voice. So I think that we have to fight for our freedom in Vietnam also. But the younger more and more pay attention on human rights and speak up. That is good.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's incredible to hear how, your advocacy has inspired others and it's still continuing today. So that's really incredible. So we have a question about Vietnamese Americans here in the US. So what advice do you have for Vietnamese Americans living here in the US and how can they support your efforts? So the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation has a local commission in St. Louis, Missouri, and there's a large Vietnamese American community there. And unfortunately, some members of that community are afraid to speak out about their experiences living under communism in Vietnam. So what advice do you have for them in what steps they should take to start sharing their story to those living in their community around them?
Thank you for the question. I think that for the people, especially the Vietnamese American live outside the country, we have to admit that today the Vietnamese community is very different. The Vietnamese community 45 years ago. Now they have all the theme and they have social media also. If 10 years ago they don't pay attention on social media, but today they pay a lot. So we have to train our mind. We have to pay attention more on the young activists, and we need to share more experience, especially like how we encourage them, how we support them. Like I talked that when the people feel they still have support outside, they feel more confident to speak out. And we need to take time for the young people in Vietnam because the communist government control the education, they control the social media, they control the television, they control newspaper. So we have the internet, but we have to encourage the other people. It's not like if we told the people that the communist is not good, they do something like this, like that, they didn't believe because it's very different from the normal life on the social media for the people in Vietnam. So I really think that the Vietnam American live outside the country should sympathize, should share, and should take time, calm down with the young people because we are very different. We live in a free country, freedom country, but the other people, especially the Vietnam, under the communist government, they didn't know that they don't have the right to express their feeling. You know that sometimes the people just wrote on Facebook, talk on YouTube, they was arrested. So they fear that normal, and they try to pay attention on the other topic like fashion, singer, music. It's easier more than environment, pollution, political issue. It's easy. So we have to sympathize with the young generation, and we have to put ourselves in their condition to know exactly what they think to support them. And sorry, one more, one more. Just like the community outside have a strong voice, so use our voice to our government, like US government and the other government, to pay more attention on the pressure, on the control of the government with the people inside the country. Look like how did you support me? Just still and continue use that support for the other people.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And I know related to that, we have a lot of individuals here among our attendees who are interested in taking action against communism in the US cities where they live. We've seen, a lot of activity around the United States, unfortunately, with communists speaking out. And so what advice do you have for them about how to become involved locally here in the US, and what advice would you give them about how they should speak out and what they should say?
Excuse me, could you repeat your, because my line it just looked like I missed some words.
Yes, no worries. So the question was, what advice do you have for people living here in the US who are not Vietnamese Americans, just other Americans here in the US who would like to speak out about communism that they've seen in the US cities where they live, and what suggestions do you have for them about how to start that conversation and how to start speaking out?
The problem we have here today is the communist country. They know how to propaganda exactly. They want to roll another picture for people with a communist government. Look like we have a China government. They roll another picture about the Chinese human rights. Vietnamese also. So for the people, the international community who want to pay attention, I talked to you already that just your letter, your petition, even your concerns, just raise the concern with the government. And I think that through the government, like the US government, the Canada government, the other government, they put the demands on the human rights, and it will more effective. Because look like my old story, you can use it like a documentary to question or demand back to the Vietnam government that this is says that true, something like that. It was effective. And the Vietnamese government, just like the people outside, the foreigner come to Vietnam like a tourist, enjoy the good food, go around the country with a beautiful sign, and Vietnam is very welcome country. But deep inside, if you have a chance, just come to Vietnam, pay attention 1 or 2 days. It's not like in a big city, but you go to another countryside and pay attention to the normal life. You will realize that under the picture they cover a beautiful a beautiful Vietnam image outside. It really have something under the situation that the people have to lose all their land for the government, all the building, very big, beautiful building grow up, and a lot of 1,000 people have to lose their land. They have to move out for the building. A lot of story if you want to pay attention.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I know that in your advocacy and in your blogging, you have written a lot about the relationship between China and Vietnam. And we've gotten some questions for you about, what have you seen in that relationship between China and Vietnam? And what have you written about that you think is important for those here in attendance today to know?
The relationship between China and Vietnam is they depend on each other, but the Vietnamese government is belong. I think that it looks like they belong into the Chinese government for many years. So when we talk about the relationship between China and government in this day, we have to pay attention on the relationship between the US and Vietnam government also, because now this year, especially in this year on the April of 2020, the Vietnam's government talk about the relationship between US and Vietnam. It means that the first time in my life, I saw that Vietnam is nearly talk about the US like a friend, not an enemy. It's a good sign. But you know that the Vietnam, they want to control the country only by one party. It looks like just the Communist Party. it's good for the future of the country. They said that it's the same like China. So I think if you ask the same question with the other Vietnamese, they said that they don't want the government belong. They don't want the Vietnam government depends on China government. All the Vietnamese like that, but they can take out the control because you know that for a long time Vietnam depends on China already. And if the citizens talk about the relationship like me before, they will try to silence, and they will show to the world that, oh, now the Vietnam is made friend with the US, Canada, Australia already. But if Vietnam try to make the friend with the US, it means that the human rights in US is the same human rights in Vietnam, and our government will lose their control. So they don't want that. And they just want to make a friend with the US if it brings back the economic and money for them.
Right. Thank you for sharing. So what advice do you have for Vietnam and, citizens there, and what do you think it will take for there to be that shift towards democracy in Vietnam, and how soon do you think that might happen?
Wow, it's a difficult question. I think that for the democracy in Vietnam, it depends on the Vietnam. The people live inside Vietnam. If they realize that human rights and democracy is good, is good for the country, and they need the human rights, they try to stand up to fight for freedom. It depends on the people inside. And if from my story, from my view, I look back over 10 or more than 10 years ago, no one pay more attention on human rights, but today a lot of people. So I continue talk to my friend in Vietnam that if you want, you have to fight for that. And if you fight for that, you will get the result someday. So no one fight for you if you want freedom is not free, and we have to fight for freedom if we want that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. So we're getting a lot of questions from people about your life here in the United States. They're very curious about how your children have adjusted to living in the United States, and how you and your mother have as well, and curious about what your life is like here in the US. And so I know at the beginning I asked about a typical day in Vietnam. So if you could share for us what a typical day is like for you here in the US, I think people would be interested in that.
Yes, thank you for the question. My kids, my son is 7 years old now, and my daughter is 13, nearly 14 years old now. So for my son, he still miss Vietnam, and he just asked, when will we back to Vietnam? But for my daughter, she adapt with the new life is quickly, and because she learned English in Vietnam already, so she doesn't take too much time for her to adapt here. And she talked to me that even she have a right in Vietnam, especially this day, she don't have the right to speak out what she think with me because it's very different. But in the US now, she saw from from her friends and from the school, she know how to debate, how to express her feeling, and she really enjoyed the life here. And for my mom, she took the driver license already last year, and you know that my mom said that she's old tree, so took her from Vietnam to US is very different for her, very difficult, and she just think that she pray for the chance of Vietnam, so someday she can come back to visit Vietnam.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. So we're getting some more questions about the influence of Vietnam around the world, particularly in Laos and Cambodia. Can you share a little bit about the influence that Vietnam has with those countries and other countries around the world?
For Laos and Cambodia, like the two countries near Vietnam, Laos, now Vietnam's government lose their control with Laos already. And the more like Cambodia now is more depends on China than before. So it's put the Vietnam government in a difficult situation. But from the view of an activist, Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia have the same side when we speak out for the human rights. And I think that some other activists in Laos and Cambodia, they are more brave and they have more condition to speak out, because look like their English is better than us. Their English is better than us, and they have more chance to go abroad easier than the Vietnamese activists. So Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and until now, under the control of the Communist Party, the Vietnam government made a good point on their effect on the other. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. So I want to touch a little bit more on the importance of citizen journalism. So as we've already talked about, we awarded you with our Human Rights Award last year for your bravery and advocacy for human rights in Vietnam. And just last week, VOC also awarded our Human Rights Award to Chen Quishi, a popular citizen journalist in China, for his coverage of the ongoing Hong Kong protests and the CCP's response to the coronavirus pandemic. So in the same way you were detained for your activism, Chen has been detained since February 6th of this year by the CCP, and he's being denied contact with anyone. So what is your response to the similarity of how citizen journalists are treated in communist countries? And what advice do you have for activists around the world who may face persecution by their government for speaking out?
I also have, thank you for the question. I also have a lot of people, friends who work like a journalist inside Vietnam now. And the same advice that if you want to see freedom of expression or freedom for journalists, you have to fight. Because like Vietnam, the journalists and the activists need to have a connection. Sometimes in the past, we have to do same, like the journalists have the right to enter the problem, but they don't have the right to expose the truth on the media. So they just put it on the media for 5 minutes, and the activists to take it down, get the link. And after that, the government deleted this article, but it was expressed already. It looked like we have to encourage the freelance journalists, the citizen, the normal citizen who work as journalists, like in Hong Kong protests, we saw that. So for the other activists like me, even we live in exile, even we live in outside, but we still have a condition to support the other if we follow the news and we encourage them to speak out together, connection.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I know we just have a few more minutes left of our time here together, and it's been wonderful to get to talk and hear so much more from you. I want to give you just a final opportunity to share any final thoughts that you have or any encouragement that you have for those watching here today who are interested in speaking out as you have.
Yes, thank you. The last statement, I just want to say thank you for VOC again, because even when I live in Vietnam, I didn't know that in the US have a foundation, a memorial foundation for the victim of communism like this. When I talk to my friend that in Vietnam, in US, still have a foundation from the US people. They continue to raise the voice for the victim of the communist country. So my friend said that, okay, the US still pay attention on that. And I said, yes, a lot of people outside who fight for freedom. Even we don't have the right to know because we, under the communist party, everything was controlled. But I have a chance to tell my friend and the other people follow me that be courage, be brave, step out of your fear, because we always listening, we always watching by the international community outside, and we are not alone in this struggle battle for freedom. Thank you so much for VOCs.
And thank you, Mother Mushroom, not only for joining us, but for also helping us to properly understand what life under communism is really like, and for your continued bravery in combating the Vietnamese communist regime against all odds. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Please join us for future events in the Voices for Freedom series, where we will hear from more witnesses from current and former communist countries. You can find more information about upcoming events and opportunities to become involved in your local city at victimsofcommunism.org. You can also follow our work on Facebook and Twitter at VOCommunism. For the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, I'm Ashley Davis. Thank you all again for attending, and have a great day.